The ocean has a voice, not a metaphor, a literal physical voice. Sound moves through seawater nearly 5 times faster than it moves through air, and the ocean is large enough that it has been producing sound continuously since before any living thing was present to hear it. The grinding of tectonic plates, the collapse of iceberg edges into the sea, the low ancient calls of whales traveling thousands of kilometers across open water. The ocean is not silent. It has never been silent. We just built the ears to hear it relatively recently. Tonight we descend into the acoustic world of the deep ocean and into the specific mystery of one sound. It was recorded in May of 1997. It was louder than any living creature on Earth has ever been measured to make, with a rising, whooping quality unlike anything in the scientific literature at the time. The scientists who heard it on playback called it the Bloop. They were not being whimsical. That is simply what it sounded like. If you find this slow, quiet exploration of mystery something you genuinely enjoy, I'd be grateful if you'd like the video and subscribe. Letting me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you is always a quiet comfort. Now find your comfortable position, dim the lights, take a slow breath. We are leaving the map behind. For most of human history, the ocean's acoustic world was inaccessible to us. We could hear the waves against the hull of a boat. We could hear the groan of a ship's structure in a heavy swell. But the sounds happening below were beyond our instruments and our imagination. The vast, low-frequency conversations of the deep continued without us, as they had continued for millions of years before us, and as they would continue if we were not there at all. What changed was a war. The technology that eventually gave us the ears to hear the Bloop was built not to listen for strange sounds from unknown sources. It was built to hear Soviet submarines. And what that technology found, when scientists finally turned its attention to the ocean itself, was a world of sound far stranger and more complex than anyone had expected. Not the silence we had assumed, not the emptiness we had projected. Something older and louder than our assumptions had made room for. The Bloop was not the first mystery the deep ocean offered up. When we started listening, it was one of many, but it was the loudest, and for over a decade it remained unexplained. Pause here before we go any further. The ocean has a voice, and we have only recently acquired the ears to hear it. Everything the ocean said before those ears existed was said to no one. Every geological event, every whale call, every sound produced by ice fracturing in the southern dark. Not to us. We were not there, or we were there and could not hear it, which in the practical sense is the same thing. The Bloop was not recorded because the ocean decided to speak to us in 1997. It was recorded because by 1997, we had happened to point the right instruments in the right direction and keep them running. The sound had been happening in various forms for geological time. That context matters. It changes the shape of the story from one about a mysterious sound appearing out of nowhere to one about a planet that has always been speaking and a species that has only just begun to listen. The ears exist because of the Cold War. In the 1950s and 1960s, the United States Navy deployed a network of underwater hydrophones across the floors of the world's oceans. The system was called SOSUS, which stands for Sound Surveillance System, and its purpose was unambiguous: to detect Soviet submarines before they could reach close enough to launch their missiles. A hydrophone is, in its simplest form, a device that converts pressure waves in water into electrical signals. At its most sensitive, it can detect sounds of extraordinary faintness from extraordinary distances. The SOFAR's hydrophones were not simple. They were anchored to the seafloor at specific depths. Those depths exploited a physical property of the ocean that the Navy had come to understand was strategically crucial. At a certain depth, sound does not simply travel outward in all directions. It becomes trapped. It bends back on itself. It is guided along an invisible path that can carry a whisper from one side of an ocean to the other. The SOFAR's array functioned for decades as a military listening post. It was classified. Its existence was not publicly acknowledged. Sailors who worked with it did not discuss it. The data it gathered was analyzed in facilities that did not appear on public maps by personnel who did not describe their work to their families. The system was one of the most ambitious surveillance architectures ever built, and it operated in almost complete secrecy for the better part of 4 decades. When the Cold War ended, the Navy found itself with a global network of extraordinary sensitivity and no immediate military use for the full extent of its capacity. In 1991, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration gained access to a portion of the SOFA's network. The system was repurposed for civilian science. Oceanographers, who had spent careers trying to understand the acoustic life of the deep ocean, were suddenly given ears of extraordinary reach and sensitivity, built to a standard they could never have funded themselves. What they began to hear surprised them. The ocean was noisier than anyone had expected, not just biologically. The calls of whales and the clicks of sperm dolphins were now audible across distances that would previously have required the animals to be within range of a ship. But the surprise was geological. The ocean floor was producing sounds with no obvious source, sounds that traveled across entire ocean basins and arrived at multiple listening stations simultaneously. By comparing the differences in arrival time at each station, analysts could calculate approximately where those sounds had originated. The SOFA's array gave science something it had never had before: the ability to hear the ocean as a whole, rather than in isolated fragments. And in the summer of 1997, the whole ocean presented science with something it had never heard. The people who ran the civilian hydrophone monitoring program were not looking for phenomena of public interest. They were doing oceanography. They were cataloging baseline noise levels, identifying recurring geological signatures, building a picture of what the ocean sounded like under ordinary conditions. The extraordinary was not expected. When it arrived the way extraordinary things always arrive in science, as an anomaly in a data set, a spike that required explanation, a thing that did not fit the existing categories, and therefore could not be simply filed away. The SOFA's array was the infrastructure that made this possible. Built to listen for the sounds of Soviet submarines threading between the islands and ridges of the Atlantic seabed, it had been designed with a precision and sensitivity that civilian oceanography could not have funded on its own. When the Navy made it available, it handed the ocean sciences a gift it had not asked for: the ability to hear what the deep ocean actually sounded like from one end of a basin to the other. Before the recording can be understood, the channel that carried it needs to be understood. It is not intuitive. Sound travels through water differently than it travels through air, and differently at different depths. Near the surface, the water is warmer, and sound moves faster. At greater depth, the water becomes colder and denser, and sound slows down. Deeper still, below a certain point, the pressure of the overlying water becomes so intense that it begins to speed sound up again. What this means is that at a specific depth, sound speed reaches a minimum, a layer where it is slowed by cold but not yet reaccelerated by pressure. This layer acts as an acoustic waveguide. Sound entering it from above or below bends toward it, is pulled back toward the minimum speed layer, and stays there. Instead of radiating outward in 3 dimensions, it spreads in 2. Instead of weakening at the rate of a 3-dimensional signal, it travels with far less loss. The effect is comparable to a whispering gallery in a large stone building. The geometry of the space bends sound along the walls and carries it to a listener far across the room, who can hear a murmur that should have been inaudible at that distance. This layer is called the SOFAR channel, for sound fixing and ranging. It was known to the military before SOSUS. Torpedoed sailors in the Second World War were given small explosive charges that, when released to depth, would detonate inside the channel and send a recoverable signal across vast distances to listening stations on shore. But its implications for passive listening were even more significant. A sound produced inside the SOFAR channel, or at a depth that allows it to couple into the channel, does not dissipate the way that surface sound dissipates. It can travel thousands of kilometers. A signal strong enough and at the right frequency can be detected by hydrophones on the other side of an ocean basin. The SOSUS hydrophones were deliberately placed at depths corresponding to the SOFAR channel. They were positioned to take maximum advantage of this acoustic waveguide, which meant they were positioned to receive signals from sources far beyond the immediate vicinity. When the Bloop was recorded in May of 1997, it was detected not by one hydrophone station, but by multiple stations spread across thousands of kilometers of the South Pacific. The stations triangulated its approximate location of origin. It had come from a point roughly 2,000 kilometers southwest of the southern tip of South America. The sound that arrived at the stations was not faint. Whatever produced it had to have been, by any calculation, extraordinarily loud at its source. The ocean had carried it faithfully over an enormous distance and deposited it in the data without interpretation. The interpretation was a problem for the people on the surface, listening through their inherited Cold War ears, trying to understand what the deep had said. The difference from how sound works in air is significant. When someone speaks across a room, the sound radiates outward in all directions and loses energy rapidly. Doubling the distance roughly quarters the energy reaching the listener. In the SOFAR channel, the geometry is different. Sound bends back toward the minimum speed layer and stays there. It loses energy more slowly. The relationship between distance and signal strength is more favorable by a very large margin. A sound produced inside the channel can still be detectable at a distance that would be physically impossible in air. This is why the SOSUS system worked. Submarine engines produce sound in frequency ranges that couple efficiently into the SOFAR channel. That sound travels across the Atlantic or Pacific and arrives at listening stations with enough amplitude to be analyzed. The Navy knew this. What the scientists who inherited the system came to understand is that the same physics that carried submarine noise also carried everything else the ocean was producing. The calls of whales, the sound of volcanic eruptions on the seafloor, the grinding and fracturing of ice in the Southern Ocean. The SOFAR channel does not filter. It carries what enters it. May 19, 1997. A recording session that NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Laboratory had been running since gaining access to the repurposed hydrophones was ongoing. The equipment was recording passively, listening, logging. The scientists were not looking for anything in particular. The ocean was simply speaking, and they were, for once, positioned to hear it. The signal arrived at the hydrophones and was logged. It appeared in the data as a spike, a sudden large anomalous presence in the frequency record. In playback, it lasted approximately 1 minute. Its frequency profile was unusual. The sound rose over its duration, a gradual increase in pitch, while maintaining its character, rather than fading or remaining constant. When played back at many times its natural speed, it fell into the range audible to human hearing. Those who worked with the recording described it, simply and accurately, as a bloop. The recording was one of a series of anomalous sounds that NOAA scientists were accumulating during this period. The hydrophones were picking up things that had no obvious explanation. Some were geological, the sounds of earthquakes and volcanic activity occurring on the seafloor, now audible in the data in ways that land-based seismographs would have missed entirely. Some appeared to be biological, the low-frequency calls of large marine animals, including sounds that did not match any catalogued species. The ocean, it was becoming clear, had a great deal more to say than anyone had previously been in a position to hear. The bloop did not fit neatly into either category. It was loud, louder than any biological signal that had been recorded from a known species. A blue whale can produce a call that reaches roughly 188 decibels underwater. It is the loudest sound produced by any known animal, detectable at ranges of hundreds of kilometers. The bloop was detected across a range of approximately 5,000 kilometers. For a biological source to be detected at that distance inside the SOFAR channel, it would have had to be significantly louder than a blue whale, louder than any animal known to exist. It was also not clearly geological. The frequency profile, the way the pitch rose over time, did not match the signature of a known geological event. Underwater earthquakes, hydrothermal vents, and volcanic eruptions all produce sounds with identifiable characteristics that distinguish them from biological signals. The bloop did not match those signatures with confidence. The scientists catalogued it. They noted its characteristics. They did not have an explanation. The bloop went into the record and stayed there. The fact that it did not repeat is significant. Many geological signals repeat, or have known geological causes that produce recurring events. Many biological signals repeat because animals call repeatedly. The bloop appeared in the record on that day in May, and was not heard again in that form. It was a single event, an isolated entry in a catalogue that was growing larger every day as the hydrophones continued to listen and the data continued to accumulate. Scientists working with anomalous data develop a specific kind of patience. The data does not explain itself. The explanation has to come from comparison, from context, from other data gathered over time that eventually allows the anomalous event to be placed in a frame large enough to contain it. In 1997, the frame was not large enough. The bloop went into the unexplained file, and the file stayed open. The characteristics of the bloop are important to understand, because they are the source of both the mystery and the eventual resolution. It was a low-frequency sound. The dominant frequencies were at or below about 100 Hz, placing it at the low end of the range that human ears can detect, below the threshold of what most people would describe as a conventional sound, more felt than heard. At its natural playback speed, a person standing next to the hydrophone equipment would have perceived it as a deep vibration, a pressure change in the chest, rather than a note in the ear. The kind of thing that makes you aware your body is an instrument before your brain processes it as sound. When played back at many times its natural speed, as recordings of infrasonic events routinely are to bring them into the audible range for human analysis, the bloop's rising pitch quality became clear. It climbed. It had a beginning, a sustained middle, and a top, all within the 1 minute duration of the recording. It was not a flat tone. It was not random noise. It had a shape. That shape was what made the bloop so difficult to categorize. Geological sounds, with some exceptions, tend to be more broadband and less shaped. They are the acoustic equivalent of a crash, rather than a note. Biological sounds from large marine mammals tend to be more structured. They have patterns and repetitions that reflect the physiology of the animal producing them. The bloop was structured. It had a recognizable form that returned when it was played back. It sounded like something that had produced a specific sound, reflexively or deliberately, rather than like the acoustic byproduct of a geological event. The frequency range was also telling. Blue whales, fin whales, and sperm whales communicate and navigate using low-frequency sounds, precisely because those frequencies travel well through the SOFAR channel. The frequency of the bloop was within the range that the largest living things on Earth used to speak to each other across oceans, not at some alien register no known animal could produce. Within the band that enormous marine animals use every day, whatever made it was operating in the acoustic language of the giants, but the volume was wrong. Nothing with a body, no matter how large, had ever been measured producing a sound this loud. There is something in the infrasonic nature of the bloop worth dwelling on. The universe of sound below human hearing is not empty. It is full. Elephants communicate infrasonically across distances that make their calls invisible to human ears. Large whales use frequencies that pass through the body of a person standing in the water as a physical sensation rather than a perceived sound. The ocean at depth produces low-frequency vibrations that travel through the water and through the bodies of anything in the water. These vibrations are registered as pressure long before the brain identifies them as sound. The bloop was in this register. It was not heard in the conventional sense. It was detected by instruments and then translated through a change in playback speed into something audible to human ears. What was actually in the water was not the sped-up bloop that became familiar through online recordings. It was something slower and lower and more physical. passing through the water column and through everything in it for one uninterrupted minute, before fading back into the background noise of the deep. Scale is the problem, and it is not subtle. It is not a marginal discrepancy that might be explained by better instrumentation or a favorable set of conditions. It is a mismatch of such magnitude that it effectively ruled out any biological explanation involving a known species. A blue whale call at close range is approximately 188 decibels underwater. This is an enormous sound, the loudest produced by any known animal. Under favorable conditions, a blue whale's call can be detected hundreds of kilometers away. The bloop was detected at roughly 5,000 kilometers from its apparent source location. To understand what this means, consider that the SOFAR channel is an efficient acoustic waveguide, but not a perfect one. Signal still attenuates with distance. For a sound to be clearly detectable at 5,000 kilometers, it must have been extraordinarily powerful at its origin point. Calculations based on the detection range and the acoustic properties of the ocean in that region produced estimates of the bloop's source intensity well above anything a blue whale could produce. The difference is not a factor of 2 or 3. It is not the kind of difference that an unusually healthy or unusually large specimen could account for. An animal producing a sound this intense would need to be so much larger than a blue whale that it falls outside the biological range of what has ever lived on Earth. The fossil record includes enormous animals, the largest sauropod dinosaurs, the largest sharks, the largest whales. None of them approach the size required to generate a sound of this amplitude. The ocean is not, so far as any evidence has ever suggested, hiding an organism of that scale. This is why the bloop was genuinely puzzling to the scientists who studied it. It was not puzzling because they were unfamiliar with the physics involved. It was puzzling because the physics made clear that no existing biological source could account for it. The scale was simply, unambiguously, wrong for any organism on Earth. They trusted the instruments. They trusted the calculations. And the calculations produced an answer that did not fit anything in the biological catalogue. That left 2 broad categories of explanation. Something geological, which the frequency profile made difficult to fit, or something entirely unknown. And when science presents a gap of this kind, something detected, something real, something without an obvious explanation, what fills it is imagination. The physicists and oceanographers who examined the bloop were not inexperienced. They had spent careers working with the acoustic signatures of known geological and biological sources. They had catalogues. They had comparison data. They applied their tools in good faith to the recording and reached the same conclusion repeatedly. The scale was incompatible with any known source. This is not a statement about the limits of their knowledge. It is a statement about the limits of what biology produces. Animals have physical constraints. Size imposes limits on the sounds an organism can make and the frequencies at which it can operate. The bloop fell outside those limits by a margin that experience and calculation consistently confirmed. And yet the impulse to find a biological explanation was persistent. It was persistent not among the scientists who worked with the data, but among the people who encountered the recording through other means. The scientific consensus was clear relatively early. This was not biological. The public fascination with the biological hypothesis lasted years past that consensus because the public was not responding to the calculations. It was responding to the sound. 3 categories of explanation were proposed and examined in the years following the recording, and they are worth looking at honestly, because the history of how unexplained sounds are interpreted tells us as much about the interpreters as about the sounds themselves. The first category was biological. Something alive made it. Something in the ocean, unknown to science, capable of producing a sound this large. This category attracted attention not because it was the most scientifically supported, which it was not, but because the alternative was either something mundane that did not fit the data, or something genuinely unknown. A large, unidentified biological source was the most narratively compelling explanation, and narratively compelling explanations spread. They spread through the scientific community as a possibility worth noting, and they spread through the public with considerably more enthusiasm once the recording was available online. The second category was geological, some kind of process involving the ocean floor, or the crust beneath it produced the sound. The challenge with this category was that the Bloop's frequency profile did not cleanly match any known geological sound source. Underwater earthquakes, volcanic events, and hydrothermal activity all produce sounds, but their acoustic signatures tend to differ in characteristic ways from the Bloop's recorded shape. The geological hypothesis required either an unusual type of geological event or a combination of conditions that had not previously been observed, producing exactly this acoustic profile. The third category was something human-made: military activity, industrial equipment, submarine operations, weapons testing. This was taken seriously at the time because the SOSA's network itself had been built to listen to human-made sounds in the ocean, and the ocean contains a great deal of human-made noise. The Bloop's characteristics did not match known military or industrial sources, but that determination had inherent limits. Not all military capabilities are publicly known, and the Cold War had produced underwater programs whose acoustic signatures had never been fully disclosed to the civilian scientific community. None of the 3 categories produced a confident answer. The Bloop remained in the unexplained file, and as the internet became widespread in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the unexplained file became public. The public did not linger long on the geological or military hypotheses. The creature was waiting. What is worth noting about all 3 categories is that none of them, at the time, could be definitively ruled out. Science does not eliminate hypotheses without evidence, and the evidence available in the late 1990s was not sufficient to eliminate any of them. The biological hypothesis failed on scale, but could not be absolutely disproven. The geological hypothesis was plausible, but lacked a specific source. The military hypothesis was unfalsifiable in the conventional sense, since classified information by definition cannot be used to rule things out. This is the honest state of knowledge at the time. 3 plausible categories, none confirmed, one far more exciting to the public than the other 2. The record was open. The scientists continued accumulating data. The public, which had just gained access to a recording of something genuinely unexplained, began generating explanations of its own. What the public heard when the Bloop recording became available and was shared online was the sped-up version. In that form it sounded like a deep and rising moan, a distant foghorn losing its shape, something larger than any of these descriptions made entirely comfortable. And so the creature theory found its audience. Not in the scientific literature, which had largely set it aside on the basis of scale, but in the spaces where unexplained phenomena and the human need for something significant on the other end of every mystery had always found a home. The creature being imagined was vast. It would have had to be. To produce a sound detectable 5,000 kilometers away, an animal would need to be larger than a blue whale, larger than any animal in the fossil record, something so large that it had somehow never been observed, never washed ashore, never left a mark that science could identify. The oceans are large. The deep ocean is largely unexplored. These facts are real, and they support a genuine humility about what the ocean might contain. But they do not make every unexplained event evidence of a large undiscovered animal. The gap between we do not know everything, and therefore this specific thing exists, is not as narrow as the excitement around the bloop sometimes implied. The creature hypothesis required, in addition to an animal of unprecedented size, an explanation for why it had never been detected by any other means. The SOSA's network was listening to the whole ocean continuously. A creature large enough to produce the bloop would, in theory, produce other sounds. It would have to move. It would have to surface, or the equivalent. It would have to do the things that large animals do, and some of those things would be audible to instruments of the sensitivity the SOSA's array provided. None of those things appeared in the record. The bloop appeared once, and did not repeat in a way that suggested an ongoing biological presence of that magnitude in the southern Pacific. The scientists were not dismissive of the biological hypothesis. They simply found that it required more assumptions, with less supporting evidence than the data could support. A creature of the required size would have been the most significant biological discovery in human history. The record did not produce one. It produced a single minute of sound, and then silence. The creature was a story the sound invited. The sound itself was something else. There is a specific quality of imagination that the ocean reliably activates in people who spend time thinking about it. The deep ocean is large, cold, dark, and genuinely underexplored. Scientists who have studied it have found things there that no one predicted. Animals that live without sunlight, ecosystems built on chemical energy rather than solar energy, species that have no analogues in the shallower world. The ocean has a genuine track record of containing things we did not know were there. The creature hypothesis exploited this track record. It borrowed credibility from the real strangeness of the ocean, and applied that credibility to a case where the evidence did not support the conclusion. This is not dishonest exactly. It is the application of pattern recognition to an incomplete data set. The ocean has surprised us before. It might surprise us again. But the specific form of surprise the creature hypothesis required was a particular kind, at a particular scale, with a particular absence of corroborating evidence, and the accumulation of those particulars eventually made it untenable. Not wrong in the way that flat Earth is wrong, unsupported in the way that most exciting things are unsupported before they are either confirmed or abandoned. The location of the Bloop's apparent origin was calculated from the triangulated arrival times at the listening stations. The coordinates pointed to a point in the southern Pacific, roughly 2,000 kilometers southwest of the tip of South America. Someone noticed that these coordinates were close, though not precisely, to the coordinates that the American writer H.P. Lovecraft had assigned to the fictional sunken city of R'lyeh in his 1928 story. In that story, R'lyeh is the submerged resting place of a vast and sleeping entity. The city, in Lovecraft's fiction, produces a low and impossible sound that reaches across the world and disturbs the sleep of sensitive people everywhere. The writer had placed his mythology in the southern Pacific, in deep water, in a location chosen for its remoteness and inaccessibility. And 70 years later, a real and unexplained sound had been detected coming from a region not far from those invented coordinates. This is a coincidence. The coordinates in Lovecraft's story were chosen by a fiction writer for narrative purposes. The Bloop's coordinates were calculated from hydrophone data. The proximity is not meaningful, but the fact that the connection was made, spread, and became part of the Bloop's cultural story says something real about the function of unexplained data. Mystery generates its own narratives. When something is genuinely unknown, the human mind does not simply wait in a state of comfortable ignorance. It reaches, it populates the unknown with the most vivid and meaningful things it can find. The Bloop, a real and recorded anomalous sound, became briefly adjacent to a mythology in which the deep ocean contains something ancient and sleeping and beyond human understanding. The ocean earns some of this. It is ancient. It does contain things we do not understand. The creatures that live in its deepest parts are genuinely strange, genuinely unlike anything evolved for the surface world. But the ease with which a proximity of coordinates became a cultural connection, and then became a piece of the Bloop story that persisted even as the scientific explanation advanced, reveals something about how we hold on to mystery, even when the mystery is in the process of being resolved. We want the map to have blank spaces. We want the blank spaces to contain something, and we want the something to be larger and older and stranger than we are. The Bloop, for a time, seemed to promise all of this. The ocean let us believe it for as long as it could. The R'lyeh connection is worth understanding as a cultural artifact, rather than dismissing as mere foolishness. Lovecraft wrote about the deep ocean at a time when the deep ocean was genuinely unknown in a way that it is no longer. His fiction drew on that genuine unknowing. The creatures in his stories were powerful, partly because they occupied the space of real ignorance. The abyss, the deep trench, the lightless zone where no human instrument had ever reached. By the time the Bloop was recorded, that ignorance had been substantially reduced. We had sent instruments to the deep floor. We had photographed the Mariana Trench. We had catalogued hundreds of deep-sea species that had been unknown a century earlier. And yet, the Lovecraft mythology retained its grip precisely because the ocean's depth remained mostly unseen. The fraction we had observed was large enough to remove the complete blank from the map, but not large enough to fill in the details. The Bloop landed in that remaining uncertainty, and the mythology rushed in to occupy it. That is what mythology does. It fills the spaces that knowledge has not yet reached, and it is reluctant to leave, even when knowledge begins to arrive. Alongside the Bloop Other anomalous sounds were accumulating in the hydrophone record during this period. The bloop was the loudest and the most discussed, but the ocean was offering other things at the same time. In 1999, the array detected a sound that researchers called Julia. It rose and fell slowly over several minutes, with a quality that some analysts described as biological in its phrasing. No match to any known species could be made. It was detected across a wide area of the Pacific and triangulated to a location near Antarctica. Julia has no definitive explanation. The Upsweep had been in the record even earlier, beginning in 1991, when NOAA first gained access to the array. It was not a single event, but a recurring signal present in the data for years, a series of frequency sweeps rising over time. Its origin remained uncertain for years before being attributed provisionally to volcanic or hydrothermal activity at an undersea site. The attribution is accepted, but the source has never been directly observed. Something called the train was detected in 1994. It was a long, continuous rumble with a characteristic envelope that gave it its informal name. A signal called the whistle was recorded in 1997, a brief narrowband tone that appeared once and was not repeated. What the accumulation of these sounds reveals is that the repurposing of SOSAS for civilian science opened a door into a world that had been producing sound throughout human history, without anyone on the surface being able to hear it. The ocean's acoustic life is not simple. It is layered with geological processes, biological activity, and occasional events that do not fit cleanly into either category. The deep had been saying things for millions of years. We had simply not been listening. Most of these sounds have since been attributed, with varying degrees of confidence, to geological sources, the interaction of the seafloor with tectonic and volcanic forces. But most is not all. The bloop was extraordinary in scale. It was not alone in being strange, and some of what the ocean said to those listening stations in those early years of civilian access has still not been fully understood. What the accumulation of named sounds suggests is that the hydrophone record is not a collection of isolated mysteries. It is a window into an acoustic environment that is continuously active and only partially understood. The names are informal, given by the scientists who encountered the sounds and needed some way to refer to them in discussion and in notes. Julia, Upsweep, train, whistle, bloop. They are the names of things that arrived unexplained and had to be called something while the explanation was sought. Some of those explanations came quickly. Some took years. Some have not come at all. The ocean producing its sounds in the dark for millions of years, before we had ears to hear them, has no interest in whether its sounds fit our existing categories. It simply continues. Antarctica is the most geologically violent place on Earth that does not look violent from the surface. From above, or from a satellite photograph, it appears static, a continent covered in ice, white and unchanging, as though frozen in place by the cold. The impression is false. The Antarctic ice sheet is the largest body of ice on the planet. It contains roughly 60% of all the fresh water on Earth, locked into a sheet that in places is 4 kilometers thick. The sheet is not static. It flows slowly from the interior of the continent toward the edges, driven by the weight of accumulating snowfall and the slow plastic deformation of ice under pressure. Where it reaches the coast, it floats out over the ocean as ice shelves. These are vast, flat platforms extending from the continental margins, often hundreds of meters thick and hundreds of kilometers wide. Ice shelves are under constant stress. The land ice pushing from behind presses against them. The ocean beneath exerts pressure from below. Temperature varies seasonally, and ice expands and contracts with temperature. The interface between the shelf and the open ocean is a zone of continuous movement and periodic fracture. When a piece of an ice shelf breaks away, an iceberg calves. The event is not silent. It is one of the loudest things that happens on Earth. An iceberg calving from a major ice shelf can release acoustic energy comparable to a significant earthquake. The break propagates through the ice as a fracture, and the fracture produces low-frequency pressure waves that travel outward through the water as sound. Ice shelves are also subject to internal movement, as a shelf grinds against the seafloor beneath it, or against the bedrock at its edges, or fractures internally under the stress of its own weight and movement. It produces sounds. These sounds are low frequency. They are powerful. They are produced at or near the surface of the ocean, which allows them to couple efficiently into the SOFAR channel. And they travel. A sound produced by fracturing Antarctic ice does not stay near Antarctica. It enters the channel and moves. What emerges at a distant hydrophone station 5,000 kilometers away is a signal from the southern ice, compressed by the acoustic geometry of the channel, but still there. The Bloop's apparent origin pointed southwest of South America. This is consistent with the Southern Ocean region, where Antarctic ice processes occur. The pieces were present. It took time and additional data to fit them together. In the years following the Bloop's detection, NOAA scientists examining the recording and similar events in the hydrophone record began to consider Antarctic sources more seriously. The location that the triangulation pointed toward, in the southern Pacific Southwest of South America, was consistent with the region where Antarctic ice processes were known to occur. But consistent is not proof. What was needed was a comparison of acoustic signatures, and the signatures of Antarctic ice events had not yet been sufficiently catalogued to make that comparison. The comparison that proved decisive was not immediate. It required the accumulation of additional recordings of Antarctic ice events and their acoustic characteristics, and a systematic analysis of how those characteristics compared to the Bloop's recorded shape. The work took years, and it required a kind of methodical patience that is not well suited to media coverage or popular interest. The mystery lingered in public awareness long after the scientific explanation had begun to take shape. By 2012, NOAA had sufficient data to make a confident determination. The Bloop was an icequake. An icequake is not the same as a calving event. When an iceberg calves from a shelf, a piece of ice breaks free and falls into the water. A dramatic, visible event with a distinctive acoustic profile. An icequake is something quieter in its cause and louder in its effect. A fracture propagating through the interior of a large ice mass, releasing stress that has been accumulating as the ice moves and deforms under pressure. The fracture does not produce a surface splash. It produces a pressure wave. And the pressure wave, entering the water, enters the SOFAR channel. The frequency profile of the Bloop, its rising pitch over time, matched the acoustic signature of icequake events. The frequency range matched, the duration matched, the amplitude, which had seemed so impossibly large for a biological source, was consistent with a large-scale glacial fracture. A section of ice the size of a moderate country fracturing under its own accumulated stress produces a sound that can, with the help of the SOFAR channel, travel 5,000 kilometers and arrive at a distant hydrophone with enough energy to be clearly recorded. The bloop was ice, ancient Antarctic ice. Under pressure it could no longer bear, finally giving way. The sound that traveled 5,000 kilometers through the ocean, the sound that landed in the data and resisted explanation for 15 years, was the planet releasing a crack that had been building for longer than anyone was listening. The explanation arrived without fanfare. It was published in technical literature, acknowledged by NOAA, and became the scientific consensus. The bloop was an icequake. The mystery, as mysteries do when they are resolved by the slow accumulation of evidence, concluded not with a revelation, but with a quiet reclassification. This is how most genuine scientific mysteries end, not with the discovery of something extraordinary, but with the understanding of something ordinary, operating at a scale we had not previously appreciated. The bloop was not a creature. It was ice, doing what ice does under conditions of extreme stress. The Antarctic ice sheet was producing sounds on a scale that the SOFAR channel was carrying across an entire ocean basin, and NOAA's hydrophones were recording them, and no one had the context to interpret them correctly until the record was large enough to compare. The explanation is, in its own way, remarkable. The fact that a fracture in a glacier can be heard 5,000 kilometers away is not a small thing. The fact that the ocean is a medium in which such signals can travel that far without losing coherence is extraordinary. The acoustic properties of the SOFAR channel, which carry a submarine's engine noise across ocean basins and carry a whale's call to distant waters, also carry the sound of a continent's ice giving way under its own weight. The channel was built by physics for no one's convenience. It simply exists, and everything that enters it travels. The bloop's resolution does not make the deep ocean less strange. It makes it strange in a different way. The ocean turns out to be a place where the geological processes of an entire continent are audible, faintly but clearly, if you have the right ears and know where to place them. The continent doing those things is on the other side of the earth from the nearest listening station. That is not a diminished mystery. That is a different and larger one. What the explanation takes away is the creature. What it leaves is the ice and the ocean that carries its sound, and the question of what else the ice has been saying in the frequencies we are only now learning to hear. And what it leaves, underneath all of that, is this. The planet itself has been speaking in a language below human hearing since long before there was anyone to build instruments sensitive enough to record it. What the years of the bloop's unexplained status reveal is not something about the ocean. It is something about us. The creature hypothesis spread. It spread not because it was the most scientifically plausible explanation, which it was not, but because it was the most satisfying one. A vast unknown animal in the deep ocean ticks a specific set of human responses. It is large and therefore significant. It is hidden and therefore dangerous. It is unknown and therefore interesting. And its existence would confirm that we have not finished mapping the world. that the blank spaces on the chart still hold something worth discovering. These are not contemptible responses. They are connected to real things. The ocean is genuinely large. The deep ocean is genuinely underexplored. Unknown species are genuinely discovered with some regularity in deep-sea environments. The desire to believe that the bloop was evidence of something alive was not irrational the way that some errors are irrational. It was the application of a reasonable prior. The ocean contains things we do not know about, applied to a case where that prior happened to be wrong. But the creature hypothesis also required ignoring the scale problem, which was not a small problem. It required imagining an animal that could not exist within the biological constraints that govern how large organisms can be and still function. And it required ignoring the absence of any corroborating signal, any other acoustic evidence of an animal of that size, moving through or inhabiting the ocean where it would have had to live. The SOSUS array was listening continuously. An organism large enough to produce the blurb would have been audible in other ways too. The Lovecraft coordinates required no evidence at all. They required only that two numbers be approximately similar, and that a mythology involving a sleeping ancient thing in the deep ocean already exist, ready to receive the data. The gap between those two things and the bloop was filled by imagination without friction. What we reach for in the dark, when the data is incomplete, is worth examining. The bloop attracted the narratives that were ready and waiting for an unexplained signal from the deep. The ocean is strange enough without our additions, but we kept adding, because the additions felt more significant than the truth. And the truth, when it came, was ice, not sleeping, not ancient in the mythological sense, ancient in the geological sense, which is quieter and in its own way more vast. Resolution of the bloop opened a different kind of question, quieter and more interesting than the creature hypothesis, and largely overlooked in comparison. It is the question of what the world sounds like when you have ears capable of hearing it. The SOSUS array, repurposed for science, has produced a continuous record of the ocean's acoustic life for more than 3 decades. In that record are the sounds of thousands of earthquakes, many of them too small to be felt on land, but clearly audible through the hydrophones, indicating that the ocean floor is far more seismically active than any land-based network could reveal. There are the sounds of submarine volcanic eruptions, audible as long, low-frequency rumbles that can last for days. There are the sounds of hydrothermal fields, the hiss and pop of superheated water, meeting cold ocean, audible at ranges of hundreds of kilometers. And there are the sounds of living things, the calls of blue whales traveling routes across the Pacific that have been documented nowhere else, the low-frequency patterns of fin whales repeating at intervals that suggest communication over distances that would have seemed impossible before the hydrophones, the clicks of sperm whales navigating in total darkness, finding their prey by the sounds that return to them from the deep. The ocean is alive with acoustic information, and most of it has been passing unheard for the entire span of human history. The ocean, it turns out, is an acoustic world of almost unimaginable complexity, a world in which living things communicate, navigate, and find each other using the same physical channel that carries the sound of a fracturing glacier from the southern ice across an entire ocean basin. The same channel, the same physics. The whale and the icequake enter the SOFAR channel at different points and travel together, unseen, across thousands of kilometers of open water. They arrive at the listening stations as data, waiting to be understood. We are newcomers to this acoustic world. The SOSUS network was built in the 1950s. The scientific use of it began in the 1990s. Whatever the ocean was saying in the centuries before those instruments existed, we were not listening. We arrived with our ears at the edge of a conversation that had been ongoing for geological time. The bloop was one word in that conversation. The conversation was enormous. We had, before those repurposed instruments, heard almost none of it. Not all of the sounds in the hydrophone record have been explained. The bloop has been. The Upsweep has a provisional geological explanation. Julia remains uncertain. Several other events in the record have been attributed to geological processes, with varying degrees of confidence, but the attributions are not always definitive, and they have not all been independently confirmed. The ocean continues to produce sounds that do not fit neatly into the existing categories. Low-frequency events that do not match the signatures of known earthquakes or ice events. Repetitive patterns that suggest a periodic source, geological or biological or otherwise, without identifying it clearly. Sounds that arrive at multiple hydrophone stations and can be triangulated to approximate locations in open ocean, far from any obvious geological feature. The scientific working assumption is that most of these will turn out to be geological, because geological processes at the seafloor are enormously varied, and the acoustic signatures of many of them have not been fully characterized. The ocean floor is not simple terrain. It is a landscape of volcanic ridges, hydrothermal fields, subduction zones, mid-ocean rifts, cold seeps, and geological formations, whose acoustic behavior under different conditions has not been measured comprehensively. There is more than enough unexplored geology in the ocean to account for unexplained sounds, in principle. But there is a difference between in principle and in fact. The record contains events that have no identified source. Some of them will eventually be attributed to geological processes once those processes are better understood. Some of them may be biological, from species that have not yet been characterized acoustically. The deep ocean has revealed genuinely new species on every expedition that has reached its floor, and new species bring new sounds. A few events in the record may remain genuinely unexplained for reasons that are not yet apparent. The ocean does not guarantee explanations. It produces sounds, and it keeps its own counsel about their origins. The bloop waited 15 years before the data was sufficient to close it. Other entries in the record may wait longer. One or two may not be resolved in any time frame that can currently be predicted. That is not a failure. It is an accurate description of where we stand in relation to a planet we have been listening to for a few decades. Out of the billions of years it has been making noise. What does it mean that the ocean speaks in a register we cannot hear? The frequencies at which the bloop travelled, below 100 Hz, and in some places well below, are not frequencies the human ear was built to detect. We are tuned for voices and footsteps, and the sounds of the environments in which our species evolved. Grasslands, forests, coastlines, the range of frequencies produced by animals roughly our own size. The deep ocean communicates in frequencies below that threshold. We hear it when we hear it at all, only with instruments. only after those instruments have translated its signals into a register our biology can access. This means the ocean was speaking before we could listen, and will continue speaking long after we have gone. The blue whale calling across the Pacific is not adjusting its frequency for human audibility. The fracturing ice shelf does not modulate its acoustic output to the range our ears can detect. The seafloor processes that produce low-frequency pressure waves through the water column are indifferent to the biological constraints of the creature that eventually built hydrophones sensitive enough to record them. The acoustic world of the deep ocean is not for us. We are welcome to listen with sufficient technology and patience, but it was not made for our ears, and it does not pause for our understanding. It proceeds. It has always proceeded. The signals enter the SOFAR channel and travel, regardless of whether any instrument is present to receive them. Most of what the ocean has said since the ocean formed has passed into nothing. The signal traveled, attenuated, and dissolved, back into the background noise of the deep. No record, no instrument, no one listening. We arrived recently. We built our ears from the infrastructure of a Cold War and turned them, reluctantly at first and then with growing astonishment, toward the sound of the planet itself. And the planet, which had been making noise since before the first life appeared in its waters, continued making noise exactly as it had before. It did not speak to us. It simply spoke. We happened to be listening. In the waters of the southern Pacific, where the Bloop once arrived at the listening stations, and for a moment seemed to promise something vast and unknown, the ocean continues its long and ancient acoustic business without reference to the mystery we briefly made of it. Ice fractures in Antarctica. The pressure wave enters the channel. The signal moves outward across the water. The sound is there. It always was. We just arrived briefly with the ears to hear it. The bloop has been explained, but the explanation itself is a kind of mystery. If you let yourself stand inside it rather than simply filing it away. The sound was ice. It was a large section of glacier in the Southern Ocean, fracturing under its own accumulated weight. The stress had been building since ice first fell on that part of Antarctica. The sound travelled outward through water, into the SOFAR channel, across 5,000 kilometers of open ocean, and arrived at instruments that had been built to hear Soviet submarines, and then repurposed, after the Cold War ended, to hear the ocean itself. That chain of events requires the specific geometry of the ocean's acoustic layers, built by the relationship between temperature and pressure at depth. The Cold War competition that funded an extraordinary global listening network. The end of that competition, which freed the network for civilian science. The decision by scientists to begin systematically recording and cataloguing what the ocean was saying, and the patience to listen for years before understanding what had been heard. The bloop is, in this reading, a story about what becomes possible when you build the right ears and put them in the right places and keep them running long enough. And what you hear, it turns out, is the planet itself, the ice cracking under its own weight, the seafloor spreading along volcanic ridges, the whales calling to each other across distances that dwarf anything we have ever built. The ocean gives up its mysteries reluctantly, and always partially. The bloop is resolved, but in the same record that held the bloop, other sounds wait, events that triangulate to open ocean, to distances and depths where no obvious source has yet been named. They are in the data. They have been analyzed. They have not been explained. The ocean holds them the way it holds everything, without announcement, without apology, without any indication of when or whether it intends to yield. There is always something deeper. There is always something more to discover, and there is always still, in the acoustic darkness of the ocean floor, a sound that has no name yet, patient and indifferent and vast, waiting in the dark